special guest. Been trying to catch up with him for, I was going to say a year, but maybe 20 years.
Cats.
Maybe 20 years. Nick Barker, how are you?
G'day, Steve. I like to lean in like that.
If you want to.
Yeah,
if you want to. We're trying to do 1,000 things at once as usual.
Okay.
Now, the reason we're talking now is because the Reptiles are back together. I didn't even know until I heard that. What's the story? How did you get back together? Why?
Gone to the big advertising campaigns of the late 80s. A sport, believe it or not, a footy game got us back together. They've got a big thing down here in Melbourne called the Community Cup. They have every year to raise money for RecLink, which helps homeless people. It's all the musicians. It's called the SB Rock Dogs football team play against the RRR PBS Megahertz, and it's basically Melbourne musicians playing a game of footy against DJs and associated radio people. So it's a bit of aggro there sometimes, but they have it every year, and it's a big deal. And they always have a bunch of bands, and you know, they asked us to reform to do it, and we thought, well, that's a charity event. You can't really say no, you know. And it's a really good day. Like they had about 10,000-15,000 people. So we did it for that, and it went really good. Like we really enjoyed it and thought, done all the hard work. Might as well do a couple of gigs as well. So we did a couple of pub gigs, and they went real good. And decided we'll do a few shows interstate and see what happens. You know, I mean, it's 20 years. It's a long time for us. You know? And the good thing is all the boys had kept playing. Like it wasn't like no one was dragging a drum kit out from under the house or anything. They'd all kept playing, and everyone was. So you know, there's a good argument that we're probably musically a lot better than we were 20 years ago. You know, so.
And any time a band gets back together, or I suppose any group of people get back together, you have to revisit the reasons that you broke up in the first place. How did that go?
It's a lot of. I reckon it's a healing process. You know, Reptiles. I mean, Reptiles are only around for 3 years, and it was like that. You know, we had a lot of money spent on this. You know, 1 minute we were playing in tiny little pubs, the next minute we were, you know, supporting Jimmy on a national tour, and it was whirlwind, you know, and then it all just sort of fell in a bit of a heap. And, you know, everyone was pretty confused. We were all pretty young. You know, I suppose for me, I kind of went on to do that first solo album, which was quite successful. So, you know, I guess for me it was, you know, it was a soft landing, if you like. You know, whereas the other boys, I guess, sort of, you know, were pretty bitter about it. And, you know, it was a really weird time. It was fun, but it was also quite intense. And so getting back together, it's kind of a full circle thing, you know.
Any time that, I suppose this is kind of like, at this stage, it's almost interviewing 101 when bands get back together. The third question is always, do you have any plans to record? So I'll ask a standard question.
Yeah, well, I mean, we kind of talked about it, but you just don't know whether it's pie in the sky stuff. Look, I'll wait until we do these interstate shows, and, you know, if we get 3 people, so maybe we put the recording on the back burner. But if it goes okay and there's interest, you know, I guess the thing that you take for granted is when you're kind of 23 and you get signed to a major record label like Mushroom Records, like we did, is, you know, I mean, most people, if you say Nick Barker and the Reptiles, they'll know who you are. You know, most people of that age group will have heard of us. You know, it's debatable whether they could name any song we did, and even more debatable whether they own a record. But they did a full-on marketing job on us, you know, and we were a household name, basically, you know. But the thing about the Reptiles is we didn't, you know, at the time you had guys like Diesel and you know, bands like Noiseworks even. And this is like late 80s to 1990 when we were around, 89, 90. Bands were selling like 250, 300,000 albums, you know. It's a part of due course, you know. Reptiles didn't sell that many records, you know. Our first album, I think, didn't even get to gold, you know. And so that's the kind of difference. Whereas a lot of bands reform and there's, you know, 350,000 people out there who bought their album when they were 18 or 19, you know. Reptiles were still just kind of a glorified bar band that they tried to turn into Guns N' Roses, and it didn't really work, you know. All we wanted to be was George's Satellites, you know. So.
And Nick, the podcast sort of, what are your plans as far as, do you have definite touring plans up to a certain date with the Reptiles?
Well, as I said, you know, I mean, there's a funny thing about Facebook and all these social media things is, you know, you put stuff out on there, and we put stuff out on there when we were doing a show in Melbourne, and all these people are going, come to Sydney, come to Brisbane, come to Sydney, come to Brisbane, and you know what? But the harsh reality of life is people that say things on Facebook you know, it's like an alternative universe, you know. So we're like, oh wow, there's all these people want us to go to Sydney and Brisbane. So we kind of booked these shows in Sydney or Brisbane, and then nothing. We put it on Facebook, you know. Yeah, come and people are like, oh okay, I reckon I might be able to come to that. And it's like, you know, we haven't sold many tickets and stuff, so we're kind of like going Jesus, but we'll see what happens. If it goes good. I guess the thing about the Reptiles is when it finished up, you know, we were kind of on a downward slide, and we weren't pulling many crowds, and it was pretty awful. We certainly don't want that to happen again. So if they go well, you know, we might do some more. But you've also got to, I think you've got to take it for what it is. It's a nostalgia trip, you know, and people are only nostalgic for a certain amount of time. You know what I mean? Whether they really want that band back forever, or whether they just want it back for one night so they can go and reminisce. And you know, look. For me, I mean, I've been since Reptiles split up, and you know, I've been doing solo stuff, you know, and I still do that, and I'm still going to make another record myself. So, you know, I don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul, and Australia's not a big enough place where you can kind of have two things like that. You know what I mean? So I mean, and also I suppose the other thing is if you do a Reptiles album, where do the songs come from? You know, I mean. I guess a lot of those ideas are kind of going to be ideas that maybe I could have used myself as well. So, which I'm quite happy to do. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to do a Reptiles record, but if it's going to be pushing shit uphill, and there's 5 of us involved, and we all theoretically would have to put something into it or something like that, you know, because I don't think any record company's going to want to come along and, you know, throw money at it. You've got to be realistic about it, and as I said, is it just a brief nostalgia trip for people, or do they really want another album? They're two very big questions you've got to ask yourself.
There's not stuff on the cutting room floor that you can use like Van Halen have just done?
Even if there was, man, we wouldn't own any of it, you know. I mean, I still get kind of, you know, I still get, you know, statement of accounts from Mushroom Group of companies. I think Warner Brothers owns it now. I think Nick Barker and the Reptiles are still somewhere like $250,000 in the hole. So, you know, I don't think we're going to be, you know, ever seeing those tapes again. So anything, the point is we can't even release a best of or anything. So, and we can't package up a best of and put it out with a couple of new tracks on it, unless Warners would want to do it, which I don't think. You know what I'm saying? It's very difficult. You know,
a lot of bands re-record old songs, don't they? But you can't do that.
You know, it's kind of like if you could do a live record, I would think about that. You know, if you could do a really good live record, but I mean, once again, I mean, this costs money, you know, and like, you know, for me to do an album myself, you know, I'm looking at putting 10 grand of my own coin into it, and then really having to commit, and you know, for Reptiles to do it, we'd all have to put money in, you know, and the boys just, you know, we're not in a financial position to do it unless we do a bunch of shows and they're full of people going, do it, you know. So I guess you kind of do the shows and then you take stock and see what happens with media. You know, that's the only way you can really promote. So.
I don't want to preempt what your next song is going to be, but I do want to ask you about Plait Your Hair, that song, because it's there's still only been one song written about Bali, I think, and that's
one incredible one. There was some truly awful ones that came out. Yeah, I wrote that as a direct reaction to that because I was in Indonesia when that happened, and you know, I'd spent a lot of time there because I'm a surfer. You know, I'd been going over to Bali for years surfing with my friends when I was a teenager, and you know, we used to all drink in that bar, and I just kind of reckon that had this thing that I think people think Bali's part of Australia, and it's a rite of passage for young kids to go over there, and that, I don't know, it struck a chord with me. So I wrote that song, and you know, no one ever really listened to it, which was a shame. But I think it's a really poignant song, and really kind of summed up a pretty grim period and a bit of a real eye-opener for a lot of Australian people, you know. So you can play that if you like.
Yeah, good. I didn't want to leave.